Rain came in sideways through the open fencing of the livestock auction yard, turning hard-packed dirt to slow, sucking mud. It hissed against tin roofs and stung like pins on bare skin, but no one paid it much mind. Not the men in canvas coats and stained hats yelling bids through the drizzle, not the wiry kids poking sticks at the pens, not the auctioneer pounding his gavel from the wooden platform. The storm was old news. Everyone was too busy trying to make or save a dollar. The horse stood near the end of the line, if you could call it standing. Her left hind leg didn't take weight. She leaned against the cracked post of her pen like a tired old woman against a crutch. Her coat was the dull color of dried blood. You might have guessed she was chestnut once, before the sun, the flies, the hunger, and the years took their toll. Her hip bones jutted like hinges. Her tail barely swayed. Her eyes, wide and rimmed with white, flicked toward every shout, every sudden movement, then fell back into their own haunted stillness. People passed her by like she wasn't there. Except for him. Eli Brannon stepped out of a rusty truck that wheezed like it didn't want to be there either. He wore an oilskin jacket that had seen more use than most people's cars. One side of the collar was torn and hadn't been stitched. His boots squelched as he crossed the yard, and his left leg dragged just a hair slower than the right. You'd only notice if you watched. Most didn't. He walked with no umbrella, no hat, and no clear purpose, until he saw her. He stopped. Not in the center of the crowd or beside the shouting bidders, but alone, under the lean shadow of a warped beam. His eyes, gray as smoke, locked onto the mare. The noise faded. Not entirely. He could still hear the auctioneer calling lot numbers and the clink of coin, but it blurred around the edges. Because that horse, that collapsed silhouette of muscle and memory, looked back. Not through him. At him. The rain darkened her face until it looked bruised. She blinked slowly. There was something in that stare. Not pleading. Not fear. Something harder. Endurance. Eli didn't move. A boy, 10 maybe, barefoot in rubber boots, laughed as he splashed by. "That one's busted, mister. My pa says they're sendin' her to the trucks." Eli didn't acknowledge him. He approached the pen slowly. The mare's ears twitched, but she didn't flinch. She was past flinching. The rope halter looped around her nose was frayed, the knot tight against raw skin. Her hooves were split and overgrown. One eye had a cloudy film, but the other, that one still saw. The boy kept watching him, waiting for a reaction. When he got none, he lost interest and ran off, yelling something about a piebald in lane 3. Eli exhaled. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to steady himself. His hands stayed in his coat pockets. The mare's ribs moved like shuttered windows in a slow breeze. Her chest rose, fell, rose. He didn't need to touch her to know she was in pain. It was the kind of pain you didn't bother showing anymore. The kind you carried like a coat you never took off, even in the heat. The loudspeaker crackled, and a nasal voice called, "Lot 46, aged mare, unsound, no papers. Opening at 70. Do I hear 70? Eli blinked. The auctioneer, high on his stage, held up a clipboard and gave a tight smile that didn't touch his eyes. 70. 75. A hand went up. Eli didn't look to see who it was. 85. The auctioneer barked. "Come on, boys, lot 46's still got meat on her." The mare shifted slightly. Rain dripped from her ears, down her narrow face. 85, 90, 95 from the man in the green cap. "Thank you. 100. Do I hear 100? The world narrowed. Eli's boots sank slightly into the muck as he took one step closer. The mare didn't move. Sold. 95, lot 46, to number 22. The gavel cracked like a shot. The buyer gave a low whistle and slapped his thigh. A pair of handlers moved in. One had a blue slicker, the other a scar on his cheek and a cattle prod in his hand. The mare flicked an ear. Her knees buckled slightly as they opened the pen. She tried to step forward. Her bad leg collapsed. She fell hard. muzzle in the mud. A splash. Her sides heaved. The prod buzzed, just once, and she jerked, tried to rise, then fell again. The crowd rippled with half-laughs, murmurs, shrugs. One man muttered, "Should have gone for dog food." Eli moved before he could think himself out of it. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the rain like a wire through cloth. "Stop." The handlers turned. The crowd turned. The buyer in the green cap chuckled. "You talking to me, old man?" Eli stepped into the pen. "You don't touch her again." The man scoffed. "That's my horse now, in case you didn't hear." Eli didn't stop moving until he reached her. The handlers hesitated. Something in his face. Or maybe the stillness around him. He knelt beside the mare, coat dragging in the mud. His hand reached slowly toward her neck. She didn't pull away. The buyer took a step closer, arms wide. "Hey, you want her so bad, why don't you buy her off me?" Eli didn't look up. "How much?" The buyer grinned. "Double." "Done." The man blinked. "Wait, seriously?" Eli stood, reached into his coat, pulled out a leather roll, unwound it. Rain-soaked 20s and 50s fell into his hand. "You can count it," he said. "But not here." The man took the money like he thought it might bite. He stared at it a beat too long, then shrugged. "She's yours." The handlers backed off. Eli bent again, resting one hand just behind the mare's withers. "Come on," he murmured. "We're leaving." She didn't move. The auctioneer watched from above, jaw slightly open. The rain fell harder. Someone muttered, "Guy's crazy." Someone else said, "That horse ain't gonna make it down the road." Eli said nothing. He reached into his pocket again. This time, he pulled out an old sugar cube wrapped in wax paper. Held it to her lips. She didn't take it. But she smelled it. The wind changed. She pushed, slowly, up onto her knees. Her front legs stretched. Back ones followed, one barely holding. She rose like an ancient tree. Wobbled. Didn't fall. Eli took the lead rope and didn't pull. He just walked. She followed. The pen gate creaked. They stepped through. The crowd parted. No one laughed. Someone clapped once, quietly. It didn't catch on. Eli opened the trailer, old, patched, barely legal, and lined it with hay he'd taken from the barn that morning, though he hadn't known why. Now he did. It took 15 minutes to coax her in. Not once did he raise his voice. Not once did he force her. He just waited. Talked to her low and soft. When she stepped inside, the rain stopped. Just like that. Eli closed the ramp. He turned. The auctioneer was watching him from the platform, arms crossed. "What's her name?" the man called. Eli looked back at the trailer. She was watching him. "Sparrow." He climbed into the cab and started the truck. The engine coughed, choked, then caught. The auction faded behind them. The road ahead was slick with water and mud. But Sparrow was safe. And Eli, though he didn't know it yet, had just taken his first breath in years. The truck wheezed its way up the gravel road that led to Eli's place, an old property chiseled into the side of a valley that most had forgotten existed. Blackberry brambles tangled along the fence lines. Rust spotted the old hay rake like a skin disease. The barn leaned slightly westward, warped from years of windstorms and disuse. There was no welcome sign, no dogs barking, no porch light waiting to be switched on. Just silence. The kind that carried weight. The trailer door creaked open in protest. Sparrow didn't move at first. She stood trembling, legs locked, eyes glazed. Eli stepped in beside her. She smelled of wet leather and blood. Not fresh, but deep, stitched into her. He didn't pull the rope. He didn't speak. He just stood still long enough for her to know she wasn't alone. Eventually, one hoof moved. The other followed, barely. She stumbled down the ramp and onto the wet dirt. He led her to the far stall in the barn. Dust and mildew lifted in sheets as he opened it. Cobwebs tugged free like brittle lace. It hadn't held a horse in over a decade. She stepped inside on her own. He left the door open. That night, Eli made no fire. He sat at the kitchen table in the dim blue of a stormy dusk, his dinner untouched. The ticking clock on the wall was loud enough to make the quiet unbearable. Outside, Sparrow coughed, dry, deep. Eli's eyes flicked to the door, but he didn't rise. The next morning, she hadn't touched the water. The grain sat soaked and swollen in the corner of the stall, ignored. She stared at the back wall like she was memorizing it. Eli sat on an overturned bucket just outside the gate. He read aloud from an old Western novel, voice gravel-slow, letting the words stretch. His daughter used to love when he read like that. She'd curl up in the straw and mimic the hero's lines, sword-fighting invisible bandits with a stick. That was before the fire. Before the world shrank to silence and loss. Sparrow didn't react to the story. But she hadn't laid down, either. He counted that as something. By the 5th day, the rain stopped. The ground firmed just enough to walk her outside. Her leg dragged, scraped. Eli walked slower to match her pace. When she paused, he did too. Out by the fence line, she grazed tentatively. Just grass tips at first. Then a whole mouthful. He didn't cheer. Didn't smile. He only exhaled, barely, and rubbed the ache in his left knee. That night, she drank half a bucket. On day 7, a truck rolled up the drive, tires crunching gravel like bones. A woman stepped out, tall and sharp-eyed, with a vet bag in one hand and judgment in the other. Clara never said hello the usual way. Just tilted her head at the barn and said, "Is that the rescue?" Eli nodded. She didn't ask permission before stepping inside. He watched from the gate while she moved around Sparrow with clean efficiency. Listened to the silence of latex gloves snapping on. Heard her murmurs, clinical, clipped. "Old," Clara said finally. "Left hox shot. Might be arthritis. Could be a fracture that healed wrong. Either way, it's permanent." Eli folded his arms. "Can she walk?" "She is walking," Clara replied. "Barely. Won't last long without help." "She'll get help. She's not going to get better, Brannon. This isn't a fairy tale." He didn't answer. Clara packed up her bag with jerky movements. "You've got time to ease her down, make her comfortable. That's about the best you can do." Eli handed her an envelope, cash, folded tight. She took it but didn't pocket it right away. "You're wasting your breath and your money on a lost cause," she said, eyes narrowing. "Again." He looked past her toward the open stall, where Sparrow had begun to chew slowly on fresh hay. "She's not the lost one," he said. Clara stared at him a beat too long, then turned and left without another word. By week 3, Sparrow had begun to respond to his voice. Just flicks of the ears at first. Then a glance. One morning, she followed him to the fence line without the rope. That night, Eli brought out the box. It hadn't been touched in years. The old saddle was still there, dusty but intact. His daughter's helmet, cracked at the chin strap, sat next to it. Her ribbon from the county fair. Blue, with a slight tear. He held it like it might vanish. Sparrow nudged the gate behind him. He didn't turn. "I used to think I'd never walk back into that barn," he said aloud. "Not after they loaded her into that ambulance. Not after they told me it was the horse's fault." Sparrow huffed, low and warm. "She wasn't even riding you. But you already knew that, didn't you?" The moonlight spilled in soft through the rafters. He turned to find her closer now, watching him. That one good eye steady, waiting. He stepped out, not fast. Moved to her side and pressed his forehead to her neck. She didn't flinch. The days followed a rhythm. Walks in the morning. Brushings in the afternoon. Short trots on the soft grass if the weather held. Sparrow's limp persisted, but her stride grew more confident. Eli adjusted her feed, added supplements. She gained weight slowly. One afternoon, she whinnied. Just once. High and sharp. Eli dropped the feed bucket in surprise. He laughed for the first time in months. Sparrow trotted 2 steps toward him, then stopped, winded. That night, he wrote Clara a letter he never sent. In it, he said, "She's not just walking now. She's listening. She's trying. That's more than I did for years." He folded it and burned it in the fireplace. The next storm came in hard. Lightning cracked down the valley. The wind knocked over 2 fence posts and peeled a sheet of metal from the roof of the barn. Eli raced to check on Sparrow, coat flapping, flashlight strobing. He found her outside. Not panicked. Just standing in the rain, watching the sky. She didn't move until he touched her shoulder. Inside the barn, she leaned into him as thunder rolled. "I know," he whispered. "I hate it too." 2 days later, Clara returned. This time, she parked closer. Didn't wait to be invited in. Sparrow walked to the gate when she saw her. Clara froze. "Well, I'll be damned," she murmured. "She knows me. She remembers everything," Eli said. "She just doesn't speak until it matters." Clara performed her exam in silence. "She's still lame," she said. "I know. She still needs medical support. She's getting it. And she's still old." Eli looked down. "So am I." Clara let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. She stayed for coffee. They talked about the weather. Nothing else. The weeks passed. Eli began taking Sparrow out on longer walks. She stopped flinching at shadows. Birds didn't bother her anymore. The limp became something manageable, rhythmic. Part of her, but not all of her. Children from the nearby ranch started coming around. Not many. Just 2 or 3. They sat on the fence and watched. One brought her an apple. Another brought a book. Eli let them stay. One day, a girl with freckles asked, "What's her story?" Eli didn't answer right away. Sparrow stepped forward. Let the girl place a hand on her cheek. "She survived," he said. "That's her story." The girl smiled like it made perfect sense. That night, Eli sat with Sparrow under the stars. The pasture was still. The sky hung low and fat with stars. "She's got your stubbornness," he said softly. The wind didn't respond. But the grass bent just slightly toward them, as if listening. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the ribbon. Blue, frayed, familiar. He tied it loosely to Sparrow's halter. She didn't shake it off. He sat beside her until the moon was high. In the distance, thunder rolled again, but it felt further this time. Like a memory easing its grip. The frost came overnight, stealthy and silver. It glazed the pasture with a brittle sheen and left spiderwebs glittering like strands of glass across the fence posts. The sky was a hard, clear blue, beautiful in a way that promised pain. Sparrow stood motionless by the barn gate, her breath rising in slow clouds. Eli spotted her from the kitchen window as he poured coffee that had already gone cold. He moved stiffly that morning. The cold had stiffened his knee, and something in his back pinched every time he bent. Still, he dressed in layers, tied his boots with hands that didn't move quite right anymore, and stepped out into the crackling grass. Sparrow didn't greet him like she usually did. He frowned as he approached. Her good eye blinked slowly. Her other leg, the one she favored, trembled under the weight of her narrow body. Her chest rose and fell too fast. A cough shook through her like a wave, and she shifted her weight with a whimper she couldn't quite swallow. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He just wrapped his arm around her neck and led her inside the barn. It took longer than it should have. Each step was a negotiation. Every pause stretched longer than the last. Inside, he laid fresh straw, lined her water with electrolytes, and set down a flake of hay she didn't even sniff. She lay down within minutes, her legs tucked, sides heaving. Her ribs rose like ruins under her coat. Eli sat on the ground beside her. The air smelled like damp fur and iron. He placed one hand gently on her neck. "Don't go," he said, barely above a whisper. "Not like this. Not now." She didn't respond. Just breathed. And kept breathing. By evening, Clara had arrived. She didn't waste time with greetings. She slid beside Eli in the stall, running her hands expertly over Sparrow's flank. Her face said what her mouth didn't. "Is it infection?" Eli asked. Clara nodded. "Likely. Leg inflammation triggered something. Her immune system's wrecked." She was holding herself together with spit and spite. "Is she dying?" A long silence. "I don't know. She might be." They didn't speak after that. Clara packed a syringe and injected antibiotics, gently, behind the shoulder. She cleaned her tools and didn't meet his eyes. "I'll come back in the morning," she said. Eli stayed beside Sparrow all night. He didn't sleep. He watched the slow rise and fall of her chest, the flicker of her ears, the way her muscles twitched in dreams or pain, he couldn't tell which. Around midnight, he began to talk, not to fill the silence, but because he had to say it before it swallowed him again. "She died on a Tuesday," he said. The fire moved fast, faster than the crew expected. They told her to stay on the ridge and wait for backup. She didn't listen. Of course she didn't. She was just like me. The wind howled against the eaves. Sparrow shifted, exhaled. She took her horse, Alamo, a big Appaloosa we trained from a colt. She thought she could lead the firebreak line from the far side. "Bought us time. Bought the town time." His voice cracked but didn't stop. Alamo came back. She didn't. Sparrow opened her eye and looked at him. Really looked. Not just in passing or pain. A steady gaze. Deep. Familiar. "I know you're not her," he said. "But I needed to believe I could still save something. Even if it wasn't what I lost." Sparrow shifted, inching her head toward him. Her nose nudged his hand. He froze. Then pressed his palm to her cheek and closed his eyes. By morning, her breathing had steadied. Not healed, not whole, but steadied. Clara's eyes widened when she saw her on her feet. "I wouldn't have bet a nickel," she muttered, brushing her hair from her eyes. Eli offered no gloating. Just silence. Gratitude, deep in the lines of his face. Recovery was slow. 2 steps forward, 1 painful limp back. Sparrow began to eat again. Water disappeared from the bucket before midday. She gained a little weight, not much, but enough that her ribs no longer looked like scaffolding. Eli constructed a sling to support her hind leg, built from repurposed barn rope and an old winch. Every morning, he looped her in and gently helped her to her feet. Every evening, he massaged the muscles around the injury, whispering half-remembered cowboy songs under his breath. Clara started bringing more than just medicine. Apples. Ointments. A thermos of coffee. She never stayed long, but her visits became routine. One afternoon, she watched Sparrow shuffle along the rail line and said, "You know, this would make one hell of a newspaper story." Eli smirked. "I'm not much for headlines." She might be. Animals like her. People pay attention. Makes them feel good. Maybe they should feel bad first. Clara didn't argue. It was around that time the boy returned. The same barefoot kid from the auction, now wearing second-hand boots and a scuffed coat too big for him. He stood at the fence, eyes wide, quiet this time. Eli noticed him but said nothing. Sparrow wandered close to the boy. He didn't flinch. She sniffed his hand, then turned away. "She remembers you," Eli said. The boy looked up. She was broken. "She still is," Eli said. "Just differently." More kids came after that. Word spread in whispers. Some brought carrots, others just sat and watched. They never stayed long. Eli never encouraged them. But he didn't send them away either. Sparrow seemed to stand taller when they were there. Then, one morning, she ran. Not fast. Not far. But it was a run. Eli stood frozen, coffee mug halfway to his lips, watching from the porch. Her hooves churned soft earth in a clumsy, joyful arc. She kicked once, just a flick, and snorted like she was laughing. He stepped off the porch, approached slowly. She came to him at once. That night, he stood by the fence and stared toward the horizon, where the sky curled into gold. A decision bloomed in his chest. It came with no fanfare. Just certainty. He opened the barn and dusted off the old halter Rachel had used. It fit Sparrow better than he expected. The next day, he hitched the trailer and loaded her inside. She didn't resist. He drove back to the place where it had begun, the auction yard. It hadn't changed. Same crooked signs. Same lazy flags whipping in the wind. Same faces. A different season, but the same rhythm. The same smell of sweat, manure, oil, and detachment. People turned to stare as he unloaded her. Sparrow stepped down like a queen descending a staircase. Her coat shone, burnished by care and time. The limp was still there, but it no longer defined her. The buyer from before was there. The one in the green cap. He barked a laugh when he saw them. Well, I'll be. That old mare's still kickin'? Thought for sure you buried her in a ditch somewhere. Eli didn't respond. He walked Sparrow toward the central corral where young stock were shown off for bids. The auctioneer caught sight of him and raised an eyebrow. Eli led Sparrow in, clipped the lead to a rail, and stood back. People gathered. A murmur began. A child, the same freckled girl who'd brought books, came forward and whispered something. Eli nodded. She approached Sparrow slowly and held out a brush. Sparrow stood still. The girl began to brush her coat, long strokes, careful. The crowd hushed. She's not for sale, Eli said suddenly, voice cutting the quiet. But she's here. So you can see what you missed. A man near the back laughed nervously. You trying to shame us, Brannon? I'm trying to show you what happens when someone looks long enough to see what's worth saving. The crowd didn't applaud. But no one left. One of the auction hands approached, rubbing the back of his neck. You want to ride her? He asked, half joking. Eli considered the question. He turned to the girl. Would you like to? Her eyes widened. Me. She trusts you. With the crowd watching, Eli lifted the child gently into the saddle. Sparrow shifted, but didn't balk. The girl sat tall. Sparrow took one step forward. Then another. Then paused. Silence swept the yard. Eli watched from the gate, hands clenched tight behind his back. That small ride became a circle. Then a figure eight. Sparrow moved like a weathered boat on calm water, careful, imperfect, but sure. When the girl dismounted, tears shone in her eyes. She's beautiful, she said. Eli nodded, his throat thick. As he led Sparrow back to the trailer, someone clapped. Then another. It was awkward, stilted, but honest. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. Sparrow walked taller than ever before. On the drive home, with the window cracked and the wind tugging gently at his sleeve, Eli allowed himself a smile. Just a flicker. Just enough. The past hadn't vanished. It never would. But for the first time in a long while, it didn't ride in the front seat with him. Dawn pressed soft gold against the edge of the sky, seeping over the hills like breath returning to a long-sleeping body. The pasture glistened with dew, and the frost from the night before had melted into silence. Eli leaned against the old fence post, coffee mug in hand, steam curling upward into the chill morning air. Sparrow stood a short distance away, grazing steadily, her ears flicking lazily, the wind playing with the ribbon still tied to her halter. It had frayed further, but he hadn't replaced it. Some things weren't meant to be pristine. The farm was quiet, not empty. There was a distinction Eli had learned to live with. The silence now felt lived in, like a house finally open to light after years of shuttered rooms. He exhaled, slow and steady. There were mornings, even now, where memory rose like smoke in his chest, thick and unrelenting. But it didn't choke him anymore. He saw Clara's truck roll down the drive, tires crunching the gravel into fine dust. She stepped out without ceremony, as always, but there was no rush in her movements. She walked like someone who had decided to stay a little longer than planned. "Coffee's fresh," Eli said, raising the mug. Clara cocked an eyebrow. "Is it drinkable this time?" "Unlikely." Still, she took the second cup he offered and leaned against the post beside him. They watched Sparrow together in companionable silence. "You know," Clara began, "there are people asking if you'd bring her into the school program. They're starting a therapy writing course for the kids." Eli tilted his head, not saying no. Not saying anything. "She doesn't have to be written. Just present," Clara added, softer this time. "There's a boy. Nonverbal. He smiled when he saw her at the auction. They said it was the first time in months." The wind carried the faint smell of clover and earth. "I'm not sure she wants to be a mascot," Eli said. "She already is. Whether you like it or not." He took a sip of his coffee and let the heat settle against his teeth. "Tell them we'll come by," he said finally. "She can decide." Clara smiled, not wide, not smug, just enough to make the edges of her eyes crinkle. That afternoon, Sparrow trotted across the paddock, slow but deliberate. Her limp was still there, but it had become a part of her stride, a rhythm she'd mastered. Eli stood by the gate, watching, arms folded, the sun warm on his shoulders. A group of kids arrived, escorted by a young teacher whose nervousness was palpable. The children, however, weren't afraid. They spilled across the fence like starlings, curious and bright-eyed. One of them, the freckled girl who had once brushed Sparrow in the auction yard, stood apart from the rest, holding a sketchbook. Sparrow approached her slowly. The girl froze, wide-eyed, then offered her hand. Sparrow sniffed, huffed softly, then leaned into the touch. "She remembers you," Eli said, stepping beside the girl. "She's in all my drawings," she whispered. Eli looked down at the sketchbook. There were pages and pages, Sparrow in motion, Sparrow sleeping, Sparrow with wings, Sparrow made of fire and stars. "You gave her wings," Eli murmured. "She already had them," the girl said, as though correcting a simple mistake. The boy Clara had mentioned was there too. Small, dark-eyed, his hands twisting the hem of his jacket. He didn't approach at first, just watched from behind his teacher. Then, without prompting, he took a step forward. Another. His hand reached, slowly, until his fingers brushed Sparrow's flank. She didn't move. The boy let out a sound, small, high, a giggle wrapped in disbelief. The teacher gasped. Clara, from a distance, didn't say a word. She just crossed her arms and stared at Eli with something unreadable on her face. That evening, after the last of the visitors had gone and the sky bruised into indigo, Eli stood beneath the barn's old porch light, watching shadows dance across the field. He could still hear the echoes of the day, the laughter, the quiet gasps, the sound of hooves against soft earth. He didn't turn when Clara joined him. "She needs to be seen," Clara said quietly. "She was never invisible," Eli answered. "Just forgotten." "That's worse," she said. He nodded. There was something unspoken between them, as there often was. A shared understanding born from broken things that had somehow kept moving. They didn't need to call it anything. The following week, Sparrow was officially introduced to the youth program. She was listed not as a therapy animal, not as a lesson horse, but simply as Sparrow, companion. That seemed to suit her fine. Eli began teaching again, informally. Not riding, not yet, but groundwork. How to approach. How to lead without force. How to listen to what a horse wasn't saying out loud. He surprised himself by enjoying it. The kids listened. Not just to him, but to Sparrow, who often stood near the fence like a quiet chaperone, calm and watching. One of the boys asked if she'd been a warhorse. Eli chuckled. "No," he said. "But she survived more battles than most soldiers I've known." The boy nodded solemnly, as if that made perfect sense. Late one afternoon, a storm rolled in. Not lightning and fury, just rain. Gentle and unhurried. The kind that soaked deep into the soil and stayed a while. Eli didn't call Sparrow in. She stood in the rain like she had the first day he saw her, eyes half-lidded, tail swaying. He walked out to meet her. "You remember this, don't you?" he asked. She stepped closer, rested her head against his shoulder. For a while, they just stood there. Water dripped from his hat, his coat, her mane. It felt like being baptized again, not in fire this time, but in something cleaner. When the rain stopped, the earth smelled new. He brought her in, dried her coat, and rubbed liniment into the stiff joint. Her eyes closed as he worked, a low sound vibrating in her throat that might have been contentment. He didn't need her to run. Didn't need her to perform. She was here. That was enough. A few weeks later, a reporter came by. Not from a big paper, just the local town newsletter. She asked questions, took notes, snapped photos. Eli tolerated it, barely. When she asked if Sparrow had been a miracle, he almost said no. But then he looked at her, and the words changed before they reached his mouth. "She gave me a reason to start again," he said. "That's close enough." The article ran with a photo of Sparrow standing by the old barn, head high, wind tugging at the ribbon still tied to her halter. The headline was simple. Sparrow. It didn't need anything more. Winter came slowly that year. The frost took longer to cling. The trees shed their leaves with more grace than usual. Eli built a new shelter in the paddock. Nothing fancy, just strong wood and a sloped roof. Sparrow inspected it with mild suspicion before claiming it as her own. Clara brought over a bag of peppermint treats before the holidays. "Spoiled," she muttered, handing them to Eli. "She's earned it," he replied. They shared dinner that night. Just the two of them. No grand toasts. No confessions. Just warm food, quiet music, and the occasional shared glance that lingered longer than necessary. Outside, Sparrow stood in the moonlight, tail flicking. When spring bloomed, it did so boldly. The grass thickened, wildflowers claimed the fence line, and the wind carried pollen and possibilities. Eli opened the gate and watched as Sparrow trotted, no limp, just pace, across the field. Her mane flew behind her like a banner, her hooves dark against the green. It wasn't a gallop. Not quite. But it was freedom. And he didn't follow. He just watched. Because she didn't need him to walk beside her anymore. She chose to. Sometimes that's the difference between being healed and simply surviving. By the time dusk arrived, she had circled back. Paused beside him. Let her flank press against his arm. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. But in that silence, there was nothing empty. There was only everything.